You good, sir? Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, we have made it. Namibia's already fragile economy is left battered and bruised by the COVID-19 pandemic. Data from the Namibia Statistics Agency show that economic activities in Namibia between April and June 2020 decreased by around 4 billion Namibia dollars when compared to 2019. The Bank of Namibia also stated that Namibia's economy remains weak, with expectations of a moderate recovery this year. A very good evening and welcome to this edition of Talk of the Nation. My name is Denver Kisting and Auni Ashikuti is our sign language interpreter this evening. Tonight we take a look at the prospects of economic recovery for 2021, and to help me dissect this very important topic, I'm joined this evening by Mr. Ipumbu Shimi, the Minister of Finance. Good evening, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening, Denver. Thank you for inviting me.
We're also joined this evening by Mr. Mia Gamop II from the Namibia Economic Society. Good evening to you, sir, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here.
Later this evening, we're hoping to be joined by Dr. Jacob Nyambe, who is the Dean of the Economic Faculty at the University of Namibia. Before we get into tonight's conversation, let's take a look at the following insert.
The year 2020 was to be the start of economic recovery for many economies following years of economic headwinds.
At the end of 2019, there was a real sense that we will turn the corner and the prospects were looking up. I think the global economy itself was at the time predicted to grow with around 3.2, 3.4%. And Sub-Saharan was growing much quicker. And I think they were predicted to grow very close to 4% at the time. You remember that South Africa also came from a very difficult economic period, and they were sort of having very modest growth of around 0.8 that was being predicted at the time.
But COVID-19 happened, and the image of economic recovery soon changed dramatically. The pandemic spread with alarming speed, infecting millions and bringing economic activity to a near standstill as countries imposed tight restrictions on movement to halt the spread of the virus. By the end of the first quarter, economic recovery hopes were dashed, and for smaller economies like Namibia, an even bleaker picture emerged.
And if you look at the second and the third quarter of 2020, we have seen a decline in excess of 10%. The extent to which COVID-19 has caused damage in the country, I think even if it's projected to be at 7.8% negative, I don't think we can really explain it, and not even numbers will be able to measure it. That is just my personal view. I think it might actually be even worse than numbers can tell.
The outlook was revised downwards from around the positive growth that we anticipated to very scary numbers. This is when we were starting to predict the economy could actually go to a decline of double digits. However, government's expenditure and the whole policy response to COVID-19 sort of cushioned economies all across the world.
With the hopeful gaze of the world now on the COVID-19 vaccine, the year 2021 is said to be a long and difficult ascent, but an ascent nonetheless, with the IMF projecting a 5.5% growth. For Namibia, the arrival of the vaccine is imminent, and this, coupled with the good rains received, give a glimmer of hope.
We kind of looking at a V shape. Now, the V maybe for vaccine or whatever you can call it, but with a V shape, you kind of expecting a broad-based recovery and not really a fallout in most of or your major sectors. But as we look at the numbers and we just look at confidence really and business confidence and whether it will really pick up, we are of the view that we might see a K-shape. Now for K-shape, some people call it concussion, but I think for the K-shape, we're likely to see that some sectors might surprise to the upside. However, some sectors will probably continue to suffer. And if you look at sectors that might surprise to the upside, we're looking at sectors such as your mining. We have seen your global commodity prices already ticking up towards the end of 2020. We've seen China also spending now on infrastructure. So we're saying that maybe our mining could do well this year. Looking at rainfall, for instance, soft commodity prices have already started going up. We believe that with a better rainfall, we could see agriculture picking up as well, although at a moderate pace. And then some of the other sectors, small sectors such as your water and electricity, are also much more likely to pick up this year. But again, you have some pocket of negative growth or even slower growth. Like, for instance, your hospitality industry might not recover to your pre-COVID level. You have sectors such as your fishing sector probably also not picking up significantly. And then the other sector that we also think could still continue derailing is your wholesale and retail sector, which is quite big in this economy because there's still low demand and low investment that we foresee in 2021. As much as the overall growth might be positive, we believe that you still see some pockets of negative or even slower growth this year in some of the sectors.
It would really still be a modest number. We anticipate it. From our numbers, we could get anything between a growth of 5 and I'm being very optimistic with this, because obviously there's specific structural reforms that need to take place. We also need to understand what is government position as it relates to the budget.
Yes.
Because we all know that government is perhaps the biggest player in the economy. And with the whole issue around cutting down on expenditure and that sort of thing, we don't really know whether we would get the sort of growth rates that we want. Because if you look across the world, there's a real sense for government to sort of spend themselves out of the crisis.
But with the somewhat slow rollout of the COVID-19 vaccine and the subsequent consequences thereof, what would economic recovery for 2021 really look like amid exceptional uncertainty?
We might not see your 3% and about 3% growth levels, but I think we will see some positive growth, probably even less than 2%. But then the growth for 2021, for instance, will really hinge on the negative growth. So it will be much more a base effect and rather than a broad base. And I think the recovery, the real recovery, will really start seeing it towards 2022 onwards, depending on how we really address most of the existing structural changes, as well as how COVID-19 will phase out.
Welcome back. This is Talk of the Nation. This evening, we're unpacking the prospects of economic recovery in 2021. We've also been joined in the meantime by Dr. Jacob Nyambe, who's the Dean at the Faculty of Economics and Management Sciences at the University of Namibia. Good evening, Doctor, and welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening. Thank you.
Honourable Minister, I'd like to start with you, please. We heard COVID-19, the invisible enemy, being mentioned several times in that insert that we just saw. What exactly, from your perspective, was the impact of the pandemic on the Namibian economy?
Yes, COVID-19 had negative impact on the Namibian economy. You may recall that in 2019, there were expectations that the economy was going to recover in 2020 because all the signs pointed to a recovery. Because before that, 3 years before that, so to speak, have been very difficult years. One, commodity prices collapsed in 2016, and then we had about 3 years of successive droughts. At the same time, of course, government was also doing the responsible thing of consolidating. All those factors combined created some difficult economic conditions for the economy. But with 2020, the expectations were that agriculture is going to improve, the mining sector is going to improve, but then came COVID-19, which really created very difficult conditions for the economy because of lockdowns, and as a result, our initial projections were that the economy was going to contract by about 8%. The latest numbers now is that the contraction is a bit smaller than what we projected before. It's still quite significant. We are projecting it to be, that's now for 2020, to be around 7.3. So as you can see, this is not something I have seen before in my professional life. It's quite a big contraction. So COVID-19 had significant impact on our economy.
For the layperson at home wanting to understand, what exactly are we talking about when we're talking about a 7.3 contraction of the economy? What does that mean in layman's terms?
What it means is that if we were producing 10 goods and services before, so it means we are producing less, much less than what we were producing before. So that's why we are talking about a contraction. So the economy was not able to produce the same number of goods and services or the same quantity of goods and services, and therefore it was not able to generate the same amount of income for Namibians that work in the Namibian economy compared to the previous year. And as I said, previous year was already a difficult year. The economic activities were already depressed. Now, COVID only added salt to injury, so it actually made the situation worse. So we produced less than what we produced the year before, and the year before was already a lower year, so to speak. So it was really a bad situation.
Mr. Galma, what is your take on the impact of COVID-19, the pandemic, on the Namibian economy?
The minister is absolutely right. I mean, you know, as an economist for the past 30 years, I've never seen something like this as well. In the start of 1990s, we used to see growth of around 6 to 7%, but now it is a mirror image. It's quite negative growth, as the minister has pointed out, around, you know, going to 8%. But I think there is light at the end of the tunnel, because even though there's been fiscal consolidation efforts, there's been successive years of drought, as the minister pointed out. The prudence of economic management has always remained, which is very commendable. In fact, during my stay at the African Development Bank, you know, we have seen a level of try to look at how we can, you know, counter any kind of depressing effect on the economy. We have started with that issue of the agricultural seeds. In fact, with that seed harvesting, has been much more forthcoming, but it's now going to be materialized. So it's timely. Rain is here, agriculture is here, and I think going forward, there is going to be economic recovery. There is no doubt about that. As was mentioned also in terms of the clip that was shown, it's going to be positive, but not highly positive.
Before we venture, Mr. Galma, into the prospects of economic recovery, the 7.3% contraction that we were talking about, is that
7.8, yeah.
mainly attributable to the 5-week hard lockdown that we had?
Yeah, everything was depressing, I have to admit. And when it concerns economy, the economy rests on two pillars. Either there is a demand, in other words, people wanted to spend, people want to, thereby contribute to the economy, or the producers and the investors want to bring in money and they want to produce. Now, all those, given the health factor, given the pandemic, given COVID-19, we were told, go home, stay home. But we also told consumers, producers, can you just hold back on the economic activity? And if there's a constriction of behavior of people in the economy, then that ultimately leads to low growth and a depressed slump. But it does not mean that the economy has been mismanaged. It's just that we had a pandemic. And it was a global factor that came into us, through the world, from the world, into Africa, and it has affected us, all of us.
And in fact, we still have that pandemic. It's nothing of the past yet.
It's nothing of the past yet, but like I said, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And I'm very positive that this vaccine will become just like any other flu.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Dr. Nyambe, what is your take on the impact of the pandemic on the Namibian economy?
I think thank you very much for the opportunity. The views are similar in terms of what is common. Because what is common to the country is that there's contraction, and that contraction did not leave any household spared. It didn't leave any business the same way. It didn't leave the tourism sector in any way the way it was. Things have changed completely to be a unique situation. So we should expect that everything beyond where we are will look definitely to be a new terrain for all of us. Thank you.
Honourable Minister, you said it earlier, notwithstanding the hope that existed prior to the onset of COVID-19, our economy did not find itself in a particularly great state before then. Please unpack that a bit further.
Yes, if we look at, let's say, 15 years before 2016, because the problem really started in 2016, the Namibian economy was one of the fastest growing economies on the continent. It grew to such an extent that we were actually closing up on our neighbor South Africa, because we were growing faster than South Africa. So the gap between Namibia and South Africa was actually closing down. Of course, South Africa still remains a big economy, but because of our speed then, we were catching up quite faster. But then came 2016. You may recall 2016 commodity prices collapsed. If I just make an example of one, for instance, oil prices collapsed, I think, from June 2016 towards the end of the year, I think from about $109 a barrel to about 28 US dollar a barrel. That's a significant fall. Now, that affected not only, that affected, in fact, all of us. So that's oil, but it affected all the commodities. Uranium prices, for instance, went down quite significantly, fell quite significantly. As a result, some of our mining operations came to a standstill. Langer Heinrich, for instance, had to close down because of that. And other commodities like copper were also affected. But not only that, we trade with our neighbors, for instance. Angola is an economy that depends significantly on oil. So when their income was almost wiped out in a space of 6 months, it means we have lost that purchasing power from Angola, because Angolans used to come here for medical services, for schooling, education. We had a lot of Angolan kids here who were going to school here. They used to come and shop here. Our retail entities were full of Angolan shoppers. All that disappeared because Angolans lost their income because of oil prices, of commodity prices. So that was the genesis of our difficulties. And of course, as I said before, 3 years of successive droughts that almost wiped out our agricultural sector, our livestock sector. So that really made the situation very, 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 very difficult. So COVID-19 just came to make the situation worse.
Hearing you reflect on those matters in the way you do, the space that we frequent mostly as Namibians is the social media space. And there, the view seems to be that government blames everything that doesn't work out on COVID-19. What's your take on that stance?
Well, I think it's a reality that, that COVID-19 impacted economies negatively all over the world. In fact, the global economy contracted. It's in fact, the estimate, I think the final numbers are still coming out, the estimate is around 4.3% decline in the global economy. So it's not only, this situation is not unique to Namibia, it's a global situation. Why? As Mr. Gaup has said and Dr. Nyambe, it affected movement. People couldn't go to work. Yeah. You know, if people cannot go to work, so it means production will not be undertaken. If people cannot go and shop, it means nobody's going to buy, and therefore it doesn't make sense to produce. It means Denver could not attend a music festival, so the artists could not produce. So all those are economic activities that suffered as a result of COVID. So I don't think it's an exaggeration to say COVID really impacted economies of the world negatively. That's a reality.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gama, but surely, as we have said earlier, prior to the advent of COVID-19, our economy already found itself in dire straits. Do you concur with that stance?
Well, it was quite negative growth rates. I mean, even when it was positive, it was below 1%. As the minister pointed out, there was drought. And drought is what we call a phenomenon called El Nino effect. And this drought has got a 10-year cycle. It comes in the world globally. It starts to come from South America and then move downwards. And then we were impacted because of that. There were also depressed prices. I mean, uranium, gold that we produced, even copper. So things came to a standstill. But I mean, there is also a regard to when drought does happen, that it does displace farmers in terms of their production produce. And it has happened. So those are the primary sectors that we are concerned with. Now, the other sectors are auxiliary to those sectors. You know, manufacturing, the tertiary sector, even including government services. So when overall economy is contracting like that, it does have a ripple effect on the other sectors. So we did have quite a depressed economic growth rates.
Dr. Nyambe, let's hear from your chambers what you made of the Namibian economy prior to COVID-19.
I think I'll again refer to similar views that others have said, other speakers, but maybe let me just touch on one issue. Remember, we just came from the 2008-2009 global economic crisis. If you look at that to 2016, it's just a short period of time. The economy was recovering, it was starting to pick up quite very well, but of course it started gradually. But as it was approaching a stage where we could say that it's really doing quite very well, again, the global economy started facing challenges. We should also understand that the Namibian economy does not operate in isolation. It has markets where it exports goods to. It also imports goods from the very same markets or markets that are external. The challenge is that what happens in other markets, they also affect the Namibian economy. I think you heard what the Honorable Minister said. This is not an issue that only landed at Namibia. It came from the global sphere. Namibia started suffering, yes, like Mr. Gomez said. Drought also came in later. As drought came in, it already started weakening the economy before even COVID. So what we saw when COVID started is simply an inherent weakness that was already coming, but it's just that its magnitude is more severe than what was there before.
Apart from the prolonged drought that we saw, which other domestic factors contributed to the situation that we found ourselves in prior to COVID-19?
Okay, there were challenges. Like any other economy, you would expect unemployment to be there. So there was unemployment, especially among the youth. That was at the time when everyone was talking about, or commonly what was in the street was that, where can we get jobs? The economy is not creating jobs. Where can we get the right skills? Others would talk about how can we go into manufacturing. So it was like a soul-searching stage before COVID. Because, like I said, you came from the global economic crisis, you are starting now to draw lessons out of such. In fact, any situation that traumatizes the economy, there are usually lessons that comes out. And those lessons, you can see them in terms of economic reforms. It shows that those who are in charge, policymakers, have drawn lessons from the problems that were there. They tend always to look at what then should we do in future. But you see, COVID, it's unlike a crisis that has to do with global prices. It's a thing that is biological in nature. So the manner in which you attend to it would also require different approaches. So beyond this point, there should be some reforms that would prepare the country and the economy at large in terms of how to resist similar situations in future.
Thank you.
I think we can come to that later.
Dr. Nyamba, you're using the past in that there was unemployment, there was youth unemployment. It's not something of the past.
Let me say that every economy, even bigger economies, have unemployment rates. The Namibian economy is not an exception to such.
Yes, but it's not something of the past, Doctor.
It was there.
It still is there.
There was there. It's there even now.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Mr. Shimi, everyone seems to be concerned with the matrices of debt and deficit and wants government to cut debts. But what about growth in revenue? And what about cutting expenditure that's non-productive ultimately?
I think all those factors are important. Now, if you continue to spend money that you don't have, it means you are going to build up debt, because you can only continue to spend if you are supporting your spending with borrowing. But there's also a limit to borrowing. Because if you are not generating income so that you are able to pay back the money that you have borrowed, there will be a stage where people will stop to lend you money. So it's important that, first of all, you control how you are spending your money. You must spend it on, even if it's borrowed money, on things that are going to help you to produce higher income so that it generates enough income for you to be able to pay back. So the quality of your spending is very important. And therefore, when people talk about let's redirect and reprioritize our spending, it means let's spend on things that are going to help the economy to become more productive. Let government continue to spend money on education. Let's make sure that our health system is working, because you need a productive workforce. Let's support SMEs because we want to build businesses. Let's support the agricultural sector and be able to feed ourselves, because agriculture is a commercial activity and it is going to create jobs. But not just spend money on consumption. Yeah? So, because that is not going to, once that money is spent, it's gone. But once you have spent money on education, it is an investment that is going to generate income in the future. So, what I'm trying to say is that where you are spending the money is important, how you're spending the money, and therefore you need to control your expenditure so that you don't spend money on unproductive expenditure. But it also means that you need to spend money in such a way that you grow the economy. If you grow the economy, you generate income. And that income will come in the form of tax.
Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
Should you want to participate in tonight's very important conversation, if you have a question for one of the panelists, the number to dial is 061 291 3339. 061 291 3339. Please remember to switch off your television set or your radio to avoid any confusion. Mr. Shimi, I want to return to you very briefly. Did I understand you correctly that we have been spending money that we do not have?
Well, I wouldn't say that. I would say that many economies, many governments, when they have shortages to spend on essential things, they borrow. There's nothing wrong to borrow, because it's common that governments do borrow. So I don't know many governments without debt. So yes, we have generated some revenue that finance our spending, but there's also a gap between the revenue that we have generated and the amount of money that we need to spend on all our priorities and of course also our other obligations. So that gap has been filled by us going to the market and borrow that money to be able to meet our obligations. Yeah. So, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we have been spending money on wrong things. Yeah. It's always important to carefully look at what you spend your money on, and we have to do it continuously. As we do it, we realize that maybe this is not the best way of spending it. Let's spend it here, and that's an exercise that we have to undertake all the time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Mr. Gama, what is your take on the quality of our spending and at the same time the sustainability of our debt levels?
Well, I mean, sometimes as Namibians, we beat ourselves too hard. Even during that depressed time period, 2016 to 2019, there has been quite viable improvements as far as, using the debt effectively and efficiently.
Which are those improvements, sir?
Well, the African Development Bank has given 10 billion. And from that money, a lot has been spent on what I mentioned, the agricultural sector, in terms of getting the seed harvested, put in the ground, and grow for the agricultural produce of the economy. But then, drought compounded the issue. But now, with the rains coming, it's not the right time. The other one is on vocational education, and Community Minister is quite correct that it takes a little bit of time for education to be invested in, but the vocational funding from the African Development Bank has actually been coming forth in order to try to improve functional education, not just academic. The other area, most notably, if you go to Grove Mall, you go to Vendo Country Club, you will see high-rise highways, beautiful bridges, and people are enjoying it. It's called actually debt dividend. Debt was incurred, but then the infrastructure has been upgraded. Now it's ready, it's poised. And now with the vaccine, the pandemic going over and coming down, we will reap those benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Gama. We have our first caller this evening. Good evening, caller. Hello. Good evening, John.
Good evening, too.
We can hear you. Please go ahead with your point.
Yeah, my point is concerning about the project. Yes, I'm talking from Zambezi now. You find that in Zambezi region we have fertile soil, and the only problem of here in Zambezi, the projects we don't have a lot of projects here. We have fertile soil, we have availability of water. So we were supposed to be looking upon in terms of the projects, in terms of agricultural sectors, so that we should use our land, we should use this water in order for us to boost the economy.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you too.
Anyone keen to take John's question? Doctor, perhaps from an academic perspective, he says there's fertile land in the Zambezi region. Why don't we have more projects to actually boost the economy?
Okay, thank you. I think let's think about it from what could be constraining the agricultural sector. Is it only this time? Is it something that is inherent again? I think there are a number of issues. If you go to regions that are away from where we are currently, in order for you to get land, there are a lot of discussions that takes time. You see, one may desire to see a big farm just being established around a particular area. But I can assure you that it will take a long period to convince the owners of that land, even though they want employment, they want some opportunities that comes from such. It will take them some time to allow such to take place. I recall the days of PIDCO, I think the Honorable Minister and Mr. Gombe may remember, in the same Zambezi region, how PIDCO became problematic. It took long before the Egyptian investors could even bring tractors around. Did it go ahead? Yes, there were other constraints in the process. But it's not always very easy. Communities are also very resistant to allowing development to take place.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Are you of the view that we as a country have been spending money that we don't have?
I disagree. I disagree because I think the Honorable Minister, or even Mr. Gomez, referred to, for example, infrastructure that we see around Grove Mall. Think about the Nectal Dam. When it started, there was chaos in social media People were saying it's a waste of money, it's all such kind of things. But I can assure you, in a long term, look at the opportunities that will be associated with such. So it's a matter of doing more with less. That less, use it on very reasonable forms of investment that can help the nation in the long run. If such happens, we cannot say we're wasting resources that we didn't have. We can always say that we use resources that we didn't have, yes, but for opportunities that we're going to help the country in the long run.
Albeit borrowed resources. Mr. Shimi, the economic stimulus and relief package was introduced last year to address the negative effects on society of COVID-19. To what extent did that cushion the disaster that we would have seen had we not introduced those?
Yes, the program, the stimulus program, were of three types, so to speak. One was an emergency program. The emergency is to try and protect livelihoods. So you may recall, during our first lockdown, many economic activities were shut down. So you could not even go to Kapana because Kapana was not there. Those Kapana ladies and the young men who sell Kapana were sent home. So these people lost their livelihoods. So not only them, almost everybody was sent home. So some of us, we were still getting paid while we are at home. But the Kapana people, the people who sell at the open market, were not able to do that. They were not able to generate an income and therefore no livelihood for them. So one program was actually aimed at supporting those people. The emergency income grant was to release money into the hands of the informal traders who have lost their livelihood to be able to bring bread on the table. So that's one. The second one was to support people who lost their employment, because we know tourism, for example, people stopped traveling coming to Namibia, and therefore many of our tourism establishments have to close down.
Just one moment, please.
Yeah.
We have Nathaniel on the line. Good evening.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Nathaniel, please keep it brief.
Yeah. No, I just want to ask the comrade there in the studio name that when we are talking about development, we are excluding agriculture. Because if people there don't have food, doesn't matter, you can build the malls, the roads, the nice bridge, the nice malls, and other things. If your people they are suffering from hunger, then you will not progress. But each and every person, if you even listen to the other radio programs, people they are talking about agriculture. Why we are not investing in agriculture? Then we even create job opportunities for our people.
Thank you very much, Nathaniel.
Thank you.
Is his observation the correct one, that we're not investing in agriculture? Can you please allay his fears or not, sir?
I want to beg to differ with him that we are not investing in agriculture. Maybe he has not had us talking about agriculture today, but I think at the beginning we actually said agriculture is one of those priority sectors that we need to invest in. Dr. Nyambe talked about Nakatal Dam. Nakatal Dam is nothing else than an agricultural project. So what we want to have there is to make use of that water and produce food that we can consume ourselves and food that we can sell to the rest of the world. So that's an agricultural project. There are other agricultural activities. Agriculture continues to get a lot of support from government in terms of funding, for instance. A lot of money goes into agriculture. We finance the Agricultural Bank of Namibia, for instance, to finance farmers. That is all money going into agriculture. So agriculture is really, really a critical and an important industry. In fact, the cabinet had a retreat in December last year. And when we were asked to identify priority areas for the next 3 years or so, agriculture was number one. So agriculture enjoys a higher priority in Namibia.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gama, would you like to perhaps comment on the extent to which those stimulus and relief packages helped cushion what we would have seen had we not done that?
I mean, Namibia ought to be praised, actually, in the whole of Africa. Has been one of the very few countries that have got a strong safety net. What I mean by safety nets is, the welfare programs, pension, the disability grants, and all that. not every African country has it. So, I mean, from that point of view, I think the stimulus that was also provided actually add towards that additionality of ensuring that people who is going to fall through the cracks, given the poverty and the livelihood aspect of it in Namibia, actually was protected from that point of view. And the World Bank and IMF is actually praising us on that.
Thank you, Mr. Komop.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have our last caller for the evening, I believe. Good evening.
Good evening, Denver.
Yes.
When we talk about economic recovery, we cannot talk about economic recovery as long as we continue our regional discrimination. And when I talk about regional discrimination, we need equal investment through regions. We need equal investment through agriculture in regions. When you work in agriculture like horticulture in your northern regions, you provide seeds and all logistics nearly free of charge. But when it comes to hard-up region, you must pay 50% and the government 50%. As long as these kind of discriminatory kind of practices continue, you can forget about economic recovery.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Dawson.
that is the thing that causes urbanization by people.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Bring
Dawson.
the development where the people is, and then we can talk about economic recovery.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dawson. Mr. Shimi, I know you're not here as the Minister of Agriculture, but what do you make of Mr. Dawson's sentiments that there's unequal investment in regional agriculture?
Well, what I want to point out, Mr. Dawson, is that I think what is important, and I believe we are going to continue to focus on that and probably take a deeper dive into that, is to look at the regional profiles. So we need to go to Hardap and say, what is Hardap's strength? It may be agriculture, it may be tourism, it may be something else, because each and every region is unique, and therefore we cannot apply the same formula to all the regions. If I take Zambezi, for instance, water, land, beautiful sceneries, so that lends itself to agriculture and maybe tourism.
Thank you. Thank you.
So those regional profiles are important, and we need to do those assessments so that we can actually identify those unique opportunities for each and every region.
Doctor, what do you make of that?
I concur. There is need to identify potential of each region and be able to invest in such, because at times you can end up, I think, just like the caller said, maybe to contradict him a little bit, is whether Hardap, is Karas going the other side, a suitable place for agriculture? I think those are the issues that should be looked into. If it's not, one has to look at what is it good for. Then if it is small stock, like in this case, one can say, okay, why can't we just advance small stock in that area? Agriculture is not just in a name. It also has different areas of concentration.
Thank you very much. Mr. Shimi, we often come under fire for what people term our over-reliance on SACO revenue and dwindling SACO revenue, we have to add. What do you make of that stance, and what are the options of exploring new sources of revenue?
Well, it's true to say that Namibia generates about 30% of its revenue from SACO. It's quite significant, but of course, if you compare to other countries like Lesotho, Swaziland, they get a higher proportion of their revenue from SACO. But this is not, we mustn't see this as Namibia is getting a gift from SACO. The SACO money is money that is generated by all the member countries that are members of SACO.
It's not free money, in other words.
It's not free money. Namibia is just getting its fair share. As Namibians import goods from outside the SACO region, those goods are taxed, and that tax is collected by the SACO countries, and that money is distributed to their member countries. So each and every country, I should say, gets a fair share. But that doesn't take away the need to diversify our revenue base. We should continue to diversify our revenue base. One, you have said it already before, We need to grow the economy. As you grow the economy and diversify the economy, you're able to create a tax base. When you create a larger tax base, it means you are able to collect more revenue. That also doesn't take take away the need for us to strengthen our administration, so that when revenue is generated there, because the economy is growing, we have the capacity to collect that revenue, because that's also a weakness at the moment. So we're not very strong with our administration, and that's what we are working on. The fact that we are going to establish a revenue authority in a very short space of time is to address that need of strengthening our revenue administration.
What are the gaps that we're experiencing at the moment in our revenue administration? Why are we struggling with that?
Well, it's a compliance issue, and I will tell you why it's a compliance issue. Well, you know, the taxpayers are very sophisticated. They employ all kinds of skills, to try and avoid tax. Because if the law is differently phrased, they can interpret in such a way that they are not obliged to pay tax. That's one. So if we don't have the requisite skills to be able to identify these whole loopholes in the law that people are using, you will not be able to enforce compliance. So our biggest weakness is really to enforce compliance of the law, and also to make sure that our law is up to date and make sure that we catch everybody in the net who ought to pay tax.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Gomop, 30% amounts to almost a third of our revenue sources. Would you say that we are over-reliant on that source? The source is dwindling, and how do we actually diversify our sources of revenue?
Well, I mean, in terms of the SACU determination, you know, the leading indicator for SACU revenue flows is actually vehicle sales. Last year it was quite low, but I think this year, as you can see even in the newspapers, the vehicle sales are starting to pick up.
Gradually.
That will mean a gradual build-up of revenue base. And SACU forms quite a significant component of, as you said, 30%. But what we need to also understand right now is that in this midst of the pandemic, we're actually realizing that African nations have to be self-reliant now. And talking about the agricultural produce, talking about the need for creating import substitution possibilities, which actually means that we can through Team Namibia now start to generate more goods, produce more goods, and start to look at the Africa Free Trade Area, the continental one. It's been a gateway that we can now sell our goods among ourselves. And I think there is a sense of heterogeneity. That means differentiated goods, depending on the comparative potential where the economies are in Africa. You know, us, blue economy, as you know, green economy.
Thank you.
Coming forward. Even the water reservoir, the underground water, very huge here in Namibia.
Thank you, Mr.
Going
Gomop.
forward. Yes.
Gentlemen, we've unfortunately run out of time. Dr. Nyambe, in conclusion, I would like you to very briefly touch on how do we build a resilient economy that can withstand these external pressures and shocks. Very briefly.
Okay, thank you. I think the whole thing is to begin to look at domestic resource mobilization. I think in line with what the Minister has mentioned about, as well as to look at the issue of becoming more entrepreneurial in our undertakings as a country, so that we can also think about manufacturing and becoming an export-led growth type of economy, where the little that we can produce, that ends up at the external market. I think that will help us a lot in terms of both creating jobs, earning foreign currency, as well as sustaining ourselves in times of need.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Doctor. Mr. Gomop, the light at the end of the tunnel that you spoke about so elaborately at the start of our discussion, please contextualize that for us in terms of the way forward very briefly.
Namibia needs to be more open, trade more. The more you trade, the more the revenue. The more you trade, the more self-reliant you become. And most importantly, the more you trade, the more people are able to be taken out of the poverty net into a more livelihood net.
Do we have the capacity to trade more at the moment?
Absolutely. Namibia has got quite strong capacity. You know that we actually used to import tomatoes even. Now I'm realizing that there are actually imports from Stamrit.
Thank you.
Tomatoes.
Thank you very much, sir.
Not imports, but internally produced here in Namibia. And that is very encouraging.
By Namibians for
By
Namibians.
Namibians for Namibians, and Team Namibia as well.
Mr. Shimi, you have the brief final word this evening.
Well, I believe we know where our strengths are in resources. We know that already. We know our strength is in tourism. We know our strength is in logistics. But we now need to move forward and say, we also seem to have strength in energy, green energy. People are now talking about green energy. We seem to have, don't seem, in fact, we have the highest energy or sun resource in the world. Only second to one country called Chile, I believe. So that's an opportunity. We also now need to start thinking about the continent has opened up. We have strength in terms of infrastructure. We need to identify those pockets where we can use our existing skills and existing know-how, attract investment, both domestic and foreign, to start supplying goods and services to the rest of the continent. I think that opportunity is an exciting opportunity. It has opened up this year when the Continental Free Trade Area was launched. Namibia must make use of that.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Fellow Namibians, the recovery of the economy depends on everyone's individual contribution, so let's all please do our part. This was Talk of the Nation for this week. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. Have a good week.